Welcome to the Westminster tradition where we unpack lessons for the public service. I'm Alison Lloyd-Wright, Managing Director of the Good Trouble Group and recovering public servant. And joining me today on Kaurna land are my fellow recovering public servants, Caroline Crozer-Barlow.
Hello, Alison.
And Danielle Elston, Managing Director of Good Government Advisory.
Hello, Alison.
So, Danielle, I understand that the theme of this episode comes directly from a question you get asked a lot. What's that question?
I do. I get asked, am I allowed to post this, or I want to get out of my sector and into the public service. Should I have a LinkedIn? Should I not have a LinkedIn? I'm stuck at management. I want to go up. Should I be commenting on other people's posts? My boss says never write anything on the internet ever, even if it's congratulations on your appointment. What if they then later get sacked and you are associated with that comment? I'm a teacher. I make TikToks about teaching to tell people about different ways of teaching. Am I allowed to? So I find that this comes up all the time. People constantly asking, feeling pushed in two really clear directions. One is talking about my practice is a part of, is a good thing. I should do more of it. Being pulled really heavily in that direction of, if I was at the bank, it would be expected that I would talk about great KPIs or something. And then pulled very hard in the other direction, which is absolutely seen and not heard. Do not touch it. Do not have anything to do with it. And then the second shoe I get a lot of is, I really want to campaign to the state government to get the roundabout at the end of my street moved, installed, whatever. But I'm a public health official. I'm a policy officer in such and such. Am I allowed even to write a letter to my MP saying that kids are getting run over at the end of the street? Could we change it? So there's kind of two bits to it, and I get asked it all the time.
So today we're going to do our best to endeavour to answer those questions about how public you can be as a public servant, as honestly and practically as we can. But we would, of course, like to offer the usual disclaimer that you should check your department and public sector commission policies and advice. But to do that, we should probably start with where this expectation that public servants are neither to be seen nor heard, really, actually comes from, because it's older than social media. Danielle, as our resident history nerd, where does all this begin?
Curious to know whether the alarm is going to be edited in later. So the idea that public servants shouldn't have opinions is actually baked into kind of our Westminster inheritance, and it comes with a particular constitutional shape in Australia that I think is relevant, which is that we watch a lot of American TV and we get quoted as to what freedoms and rights we have that in fact we do not have in Australia at all by certain people. We don't have explicit right to free speech. We don't have a Bill of Rights, but the High Court has recognised that instead we do have a implied freedom of political communication, which is a structural limit on government power, not a personal kind of right that you can assert. And that distinction has mattered quite a lot more than I would have expected for where public servants end up in this. And the practical history of this is that for the first 70-odd years of the Commonwealth, the rule was essentially a blanket prohibition. You serve the government of the day, whoever it is, you do not have a public political opinion, and that the logic is that the logic of the whole Westminster system, that the public services values is its permanence and its neutrality, and that governments come and go and the public servant stays, and it only works if you're not visibly on one person's side.
Yep.
But that rule was written when having a public opinion meant going to a newspaper, such a different context, or even writing a letter to the editor. The friction was enormous. What you had to do was a very big thing, and very few public servants had any public profile at all, although one day we'll go to the South Australian Industry Minister around the time that Holden, it's a Black Swans episode from the ABC, we'll link it in the show notes, who this public servant had a very high public profile and is quite an interesting character. But by and large, they were very invisible. Now, you might have a nurse who's had an Instagram account for years with a big following before they join the health department. Teacher might be kind of a well-known TikTok educator. Graduate policy officer may have a big LinkedIn, and they may be very into diversity in a workplace and be following everybody and commenting and posting. the idea that you can park all of that immediately, that you sign your contract, and that no one has kind of thought through whether that's realistic or whether it's good or has any value is, I think, a very live and open question for public services, so all of our different sectors at the moment.
And so I think for me, it's useful to think here about two separate things, which is public servants posting about their work and their role and what they do. And the other one is public servants having opinions on things the government do that don't relate to their work. Because I think I probably end up in the same place on both, but perhaps for different reasons.
Before we kind of get into the, like, what are the rules and what are the examples, like, do either of you have like a gut tummy instinct for how public a public servant can be talking about policy issues, leaving aside party political, but like how public you can be, how much you can comment?
Okay, so mine is internally contradictory. We're going to try and work through that as much as possible. One, I think there is a tremendous importance in public servants being seen to be neutral on the issues that they deal with every day. And otherwise, I think that they can and should have a role to play as individuals in public debate, but also in creating greater visibility about what the public service is and what a career in it looks like and the types of things that you get to do. I think that the fact that there's kind of silence around that and that we only really see what public servants do when they make a very tepid and boring appearance before budget estimates does the service. Yeah, it does us a disservice.
Yeah, I think building on that, for me, the distinction that matters is I think public servants can and should explain and engage with descriptions of the world in many different ways, right? Like, and I think they should be involved in conversations about evidence and data. And like, I think like there's something explanatory is never a problem for me, even though we live in a world where like sometimes facts are political. I just don't mind. Like, I don't mind if the Bureau of meteorology people are talking about the power of this particular climate model over that, even if the government is denying that there is climate change, right? Like, that part of it feels fine to me. Like, if you're engaging in a kind of conversation about facts, and I recognise facts isn't a real thing, but, you know, like a conversation about evidence and sort of describing, that should never be problematic to me. The bit that's problematic is this is what you must do with those facts. And I think that's a hard line for people to draw, because often people sort of don't have a level of nuanced awareness of the fact that the conclusions they draw from the facts is this is what you must do, like that there might be many things you could do with those facts or whatever. But like, I just think there's something for me about descriptive versus prescriptive. But that's a very self-serving definition as someone who one day hopes to go back into the public service and spends my whole life being quite descriptive about big public policy issues. But I'm actually pretty careful about not being super prescriptive about what I think the only right way is. I mean, partly that's just because how I think, but also because I do think, like, if I was ever back in the public service, it would be very hard if I said, you know, well, the only way forward is that we abolish all private schools, right? Like, that would then make it hard to go back and work in the Department for Education. So, you know, I think about those things.
And so, Danielle, what are the actual rules, at least at an APS level?
Yeah, so when I went and looked at all the rules, I've pulled the APS out just because actually it all looks pretty similar across the board, to be honest. Like, and I have some views as to how helpful some of the guidance is. Caroline, in the notes, you'll see that we've got the actual descriptions. I think it's good for you. Could you read out the actual words and where they come from as to some of these guidances that we have?
God, I really wish I could do a comedy accent, but I can't. All right. Maybe I'll just do my most Adelaide voice. So the key provision is Section 1311 of the Public Service Act 1999. An APS employee must, at all times, behave in a way that upholds the APS values and employment principles and the integrity and good reputation of the employees' agency and the APS. Then there is some APSC social media guidance updated in 2023, which says APS employees have a right to personal and political expression on social media. This right must be balanced with the obligations of APS employment and the need to be seen as trusted and impartial public servants.
Right. Super straightforward. I know exactly what I'm allowed to post and what I'm not. What does that mean in practice, Danielle?
Look, it means a risk framework, and I think we'll get to the super crystal clear and what could be done about some of this to help people out. But things intensify your exposure. Like there's kind of a sliding scale of things when you look into the documents and some of the cases that intensify what will happen. So a risk framework about how senior you are, whether the comment relates directly to your portfolio agency, which I think is probably one of the crunchier, the clearer ones to hang on to, whether your employment is identifiable even on an anonymous account, and the tone of it, which of course social media and the written language, this is why we have this problem, because it is not always clear. One person's relaxed tone is heard by someone else's as very kind of harsh, but harsh or extreme criticism of the government, ministers, or any politicians of any party is kind of in the red zone. The operative test is not actually whether you damage your public sector's reputation. It's whether a reasonable person could see the post as capable of doing so objectively, no intent required, no actual harm required. And I think we live in a world, and I'll defer to Alison here, but where the reasonable person test when it comes to social media is like, we knew what that was when I did half of law school. A reasonable person on Twitter, what's the reasonable person test? I don't know, but
it's not contextual. It's a reasonable person on the Clapham omnibus, Danielle.
I'm glad that's not contextual.
I get that. I would just say that there's a lot more different ways of thinking on the Clapham omnibus than there may have been when we invented the term a reasonable person test. Every state or territory has kind of similar frameworks, and as disclaimer at the beginning, go and check your own actual rules. And the Queensland Electoral Commission actually recently updated its political neutrality policy in 2026. This stuff is actively maintained. My first observation is it is too vague. If I want to know what I can and cannot do, I want examples. I want the difference between LinkedIn and Twitter. I want to know that it can never refer to my own agency, but signing the online petition for the roundabout at the end of my street is perfectly fine as a citizen of my country. So, is the reasonable person test doing too much work here, and how helpful do you think some of these bits of guidance are?
At which I'm going to take a slightly philosophical legal view here, which is that a lot of law relies on the reasonable person test and relies on people being able to say, in some ways it's almost like the pub test. What would an ordinary person who doesn't have a particular stake in this issue think that demonstrates? And so I disagree that we should precisely articulate the rules, because I don't think we could ever come up with a comprehensive enough set of rules to be able to do that.
With you, Alison.
And these are people that we pay to be adults who exercise judgment, and they should also, in this environment, be adults who exercise judgment.
I love that so much. In fact, is it sort of part of the entry test, right? That if you are incapable of making those judgments, that's a problem in itself. Although I will excise from that, I think there are I'm thinking about teachers and medics, and kind of it feels to me like the sort of vast majority of professions. Yeah, sector versus service. Yeah, I think there's a definite sector versus service vibe that is worth maintaining on that one. But yeah, hard agree. I think examples are helpful as an illustration, but I definitely don't love a tighter rule.
Interesting, because I suppose so. My next one is, my next question, I suppose, lends itself to whether there should be tighter rules, which is, does it make sense that seniority itself intensifies your obligations?
Mm-hmm.
And should a deputy secretary be more constrained than a graduate? Because hang on a second though, because what I think is interesting is a dep sec may be more, like, should they be more constrained than a graduate? I actually think what would happen in real life is the consequences for a graduate who strayed in their social media beyond what these very fuzzy rules are could be harsher than a dep sec who gets to say, I apologise. Look, it was, like, I think there are more opportunities for recovery from posting something that perhaps, again, I'm not saying an endorsement of a particular political party, but something that's too effusive even about your own policy direction. Or I get that seniority should always intensify your obligation not to stuff up. That's what you get the extra dollars for. But in some ways, I think the more senior you are, the less constrained I've noticed people can be on social media, for instance.
But you didn't ask us. You asked us the should question, not an is question. Like the should question is a deputy secretary should, in my mind, both speak more publicly, like, because to Alison's point, I think it's really important that we have public servants who are speaking in public, and they should also be much more judicious in how they speak and much more thoughtful in how they speak. And they should be subject to some kind of sanction or censure when they go on the other way in a way that a graduate shouldn't be. And I agree, we have power structures that seem to kick the junior, and that is a problem.
But also the reason for that is the reasonable person ought to expect that the Deputy Secretary has more influence over the budget and the direction and the projects and the programs and the minister than a graduate has. And that's why they are held to that higher standard, is because there is a risk of appearance that their political or policy view is actually shaping what should otherwise be a trusted, neutral public service.
Do you think sometimes we're a bit paranoid? Like, to stay with our graduate, like, if they were to put on LinkedIn, I've really been working on writing more succinctly. I get lots of feedback that I'm trying to put all the information into the briefing. Not that this is ever what grads do, guys. Et cetera. And they go on LinkedIn and they're like, did a briefing today and no edits were made. It's really a sign that I've kind of nailed this whole less is more and yay for dot points, basically. Yeah. I think there is like a genuinely paranoid view in a massive subsector of perhaps their own bosses, et cetera, who might see that, which is like, what if the media look at that? What if they ask what that person's briefing in the education department was in relation to curriculum? Is this all about graduates writing to break away from the national curriculum because we heard the minister? Like, even when you are being descriptive, I think there's a whole subset who are a little bit unnecessarily panicked about reading into this. I nailed a briefing. I'm using dot points. I've got this now. Yay. Anyone who wants some advice in my grad cohort, I'd love to share it with you. I think there are people who would honestly find that like, oh, well, no, people are going to ask questions, you know. Like,
see, I don't have an issue with that post, but if they were posting, I've been asked to brief on whether the national curriculum is meeting its needs and I don't think it is for these reasons, like, whoa.
Like, sure, but I think that there are a significant number, and get in touch with us. I'd love to know, bosses, how anxious you are, particularly in a generational sense, about that pretty generic post. Finally landed it, no edits, like, feel like I'm really nailing this now. I think you are you're a chilled boss. I think there are plenty of bosses who'll be like, that's, you got to be really careful, mate. And then people just stop altogether. They're like, I won't engage. I won't talk about my work. Caroline?
Yeah. And I think this gets to the should or would bit again, Dee. Like, I kind of, because I really do I think there's a should problem with posting that? Not at all. I think it's a great post. Like, good on you. If that's the kind of thing you want to celebrate, go forth and celebrate. Is there a chance that they have a paranoid boss who gets weird about it? Like, yes, there is. And so therefore maybe don't post it, right? But like, you might also have a paranoid boss, like, for like that's not saying you shouldn't. It's just like you're working in a culture which is sometimes weird.
Yeah, I just think some cultures, and this doesn't just apply to posting, it applies to all sorts of behaviour in the workplace, dissent and all sorts of other things. There are some things that you are always allowed to do, but it will be safer or less safe in some authorising
Yes.
contexts for you to do that from
And it's
like
kind
a
of your job to learn all of that and
respect
figure it
and
out
trust
kind of
and
thing.
career advancement perspective.
That's exactly right. That's such a useful framing, because I think we do conflate those two things. We conflate what are my rights with what is a good idea to do. And those things are different. I might have a right to do something, but it's not necessarily a good idea to do it.
And the second one can be a lot more contextual. Like if you work for me, Alison's not going to give a shit. Away you go. If you work for someone else, apply your judgment.
I do maintain that we need to be more specific in our guidance, like upholding values. I think either principles based or examples embedded in them. We think about what is good and appropriate for the public service more than the average public servant or bear. I don't think that's a fair request. I think there should be a ready reckoner for people to be able to be like, I want to share my practice, or I want to do this, or I want to do that. I wonder where that sits in the rules. And I'm not sure that all this kind of uphold integrity, be apolitical is concrete enough for me to go, is this right kind of thing.
I think also just the other thing to say is it's wild to me. People shouldn't assume that there is a single black and white answer. And I refer to the dirty ambulances protest just before the state election where ambos were writing on the, in South Australia, they were writing on the ambulances fair pay, something, end ramping, something. And it's that is clearly political speech. It is clearly being undertaken by public servants or people working in the public services. And I never quite understood any of the kind of nuance around that, but I knew that it was also relating to an industrial relations thing. And it was also I just think there's a lot of stuff going on here. And I'm not sure there's ever a single kind of easy answer. Although maybe you can explain to me, why were they allowed to do that? Why didn't they just wash the ambulances every day?
They could, and in parts they did, and there's the specifics of it. But if we get out of the specifics of that one, you have different not rights, but certainly if you're in bargaining, for instance, and what you can attach to in a bargaining period, a declared bargaining period under industrial relations laws, not under all our other ones that we're talking about or our other guidance.
Yeah.
Your what you are able to do and talk about in relation to the impact of your work is broader and is different. And that was the essential argument. In the same way that, for instance, a teacher could talk about class sizes, and if you're in a bargaining period, your capacity to do so and your opportunity to do so is broader and greater, and you are protected by that by the bargaining period.
So let's go to some of the specific questions that you get, Danielle. Does anonymity protect you? Can I post as
No.
Sturt Desert P?
No.
She totally would.
Because that wouldn't be obvious for a start.
It's so true.
Alison would choose something so South Australian, and it would be oh, I wonder who that is.
Someone with a pin diplomacy. Yeah,
someone with a niche nerd history in South Australian.
I don't know what you're talking about.
So no, and it's unequivocal, for all of us based on the fact that the High Court has confirmed it. So if there's a reasonable chance your identity can be discovered and the post could damage confidence, you are in breach. Posting as at some Sturt Desert P or Pie Floaters for All is not a shield. That was a central lesson from Banerjee, which we'll come to as a specific example of this.
Well, it does protect you if they don't find out it was you. Yes, and pie floaters are disgusting. Anyway, sorry.
LinkedIn, should I be on it as a public servant?
I mean, I say yes, but I'm also on the outside without access to the global. So for God's sake, please be on it so that when I go to the meeting, I have the foggiest idea what your job title is as having been invited to the meeting. But the same risk framework applies, and the twist is that the guidance hasn't really caught up, so that in some ways a lot of the guidance was written and even updated really with those Facebooky kind of early Twitter in mind. LinkedIn is the platform I see people struggling, public servants struggling the most, the risk runs in the opposite direction to what people expect, which is, your employer is visible, your seniority is visible. So when a senior public servant is publicly praising a minister's announcement or celebrating a government initiative or positioning themselves as an enthusiastic advocate for their agency's program, that is a really tricky question that comes up, which is that impartial? And the appearance of independence can kind of run both ways. Like, it's really like, I impartially delivered this thing I don't agree with, but we did it really well and here it is. Or I thought it was a great idea and I like what colour do we not use anymore? The grey team. And I vote for the grey team, and that's why I so enthusiastically, like, if you built a professional page, then what does that mean? And then there's this whole separate one, which is all the people who have big LinkedIn followings or are very active on it from the outside and then join the public service, and every other comment they've ever made previously about government or interactions. What do you do with all that?
Can I ask, what do you guys, like, if you went back and worked in the public service now, would you scrub your LinkedIn profile? I haven't thought about it, but now I am.
One, no such intention, but two.
Yeah. No, I know. But thought experiment.
No. So, but partly because sometimes I think I'm still behaving like a public servant.
That's true.
So I still put the lens over anything I would think or do that, it is the equivalent of putting something on the front page of the paper. It is discoverable forever. Would I be prepared to, I responded this morning with a comment that I would want someone to pry the Oxford comma out of my cold dead hands. Now, I'm prepared to stand by that. I
testify to that effect. Yes,
I have no intention of going back to the service, but I just think, like, you can take the girl out of it, but not it out of the girl, in the sense that I'm always pretty careful. I am apolitical in that sense of, I think, like, some policies are excellent, some policies are great ideas and poorly executed, some policies are terrible ideas and remarkably rescued by a great public servant who executes it to perfection and turns it around. So I don't think, like, in that even-handedness of it. But yeah, no, I think I still probably operate a little bit really carefully. More carefully. I didn't have a profile when I was on the public servant. I didn't use it. I was terrified of it.
Yeah, interesting.
I do think there's a difference between celebrating the work and advocating for the government, and at risk of going back to that reasonable person test, it's not even a reasonable person test. It's like, if you were going to be an asshole about it, is there a way that I could read your posts in conjunction as having a particular, bias?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's reasonably straightforward in lots of ways. It's I think if I was a public servant, I would never post at Premier Malinowskis's brilliant idea to do 3-year-old preschool is rolling out. But I would totally post, I love the 3-year-old preschool rollout and the work that's being done there for South Australia's kids, right? One of those feels to me like a blatantly political thing, and the other one feels like a celebration of a piece of work being done by good people for good effect.
What about technical roles, Danielle? So the TikTok
teacher.
We
are so struggling with this, particularly because, and I had this other view, not just the TikTok teacher, but I lecture doctors all the time, whether they asked me to or not, on the fact that they can't
professionally, not just in appointments. To be clear, everyone.
A bit of me. But you cannot constantly tell me that everyone is filled with misinformation before they get to the appointment, that we are radically changing our trust in science and medicine and the government that regulates and approves whether it's a drug or a vaccine or a treatment or a procedure, and I'm getting my peptides on the internet. You can't do all of that and then say, the noise in social media is so overwhelming if you're not a part of the conversation. So if I'm not able to find you where I get my information. So lots of people get their information, and there's lots of data on it, and this isn't this episode, but I do have a whole thing that I've done before on it, which is the number of people and by age range who get the vast majority of their news, medical information, scientific information from a form of social media, for instance. And so in some part of me is like they're public servants too and conservative and that. The other part of it is I would like every public sector doctor to be on TikTok and in the car park on the way home talking about good science, good work in an accessible, friendly way and balancing out all the noise that people are being subjected to that is not scientific, it's not rigorous. And so, I think teaching is another one, and it comes up a lot because there's a lot of young teachers, and I love them online. Like I just find them like just fascinating. I want to go back to school.
Infectiously happy.
I want to go back to school, especially the primary school ones. I'm like, oh, take me. I'll be in your year 1 class. So, but I think the medical one is a really big question, which is if we are absenting the space, what is the remaining both professional and democratic risk of that? Like that is that's the town square. That is the town square.
So 2 thoughts. Like one, I'd agree completely, but is it their worry about the public service ethics that's stopping them from being in the town square, or is it like
any number of other factors?
That's right. The demographics or the whatever. So I think it's just kind of interesting to think through what is stopping them and if that is what is stopping it or one of the things that's worth combating. But 2, then as you were describing it and you're like, I want every GP kind of, in there, or not every GP, every public emergency doctor in their car park doing something. One of the challenges is, of course, that in every workforce, there's a few crazies. And so you may well get some emergency doctors in their car park saying things like, and of course we know that this vaccine causes autism and that's why I didn't blah, blah, blah. And so it's just an interesting gloss on that is to think through that's not a public sector code of ethics problem, but it may well become a problem for a manager. Like if you've now got a staff member who's on the record as saying something like it's a professional practice. I don't really understand.
But is it? Hang on. I'd question that. Isn't it a public sector problem? So if the position of the government is that vaccines are good, and of course we've ended up in vaccines, which I was actually hoping to avoid, but we're there anyway.
SOS.
Can you jump on the internet as a public sector medical officer and say that your belief is that they are bad and science is bad? I've made this incredibly rudimentary, but let's
No, that's a good question.
Can you? I think that's a code of ethics violation.
Yeah, I think maybe that's true if you're saying, well, I think you shouldn't work for the public sector if that's your belief, you shouldn't work in the health system that's doing that. Yes, I can see how that's a problem. Yes.
And I guess the distinction I would draw there,
tend to worry more about someone saying that there's not enough resources. We worry about other things.
That's very true.
That's a pretty kind of, there's a affirmed and certain government position and what you're saying is contrary to it. There are a lot of other things that are just kind of in the grey area about, is it safe and desirable to use an e-scooter, for example? I have one. That I think aren't necessarily a clear-cut kind of code of ethics violation, but nonetheless might not be supported by evidence.
Emergency doctors would not support that choice.
Yes. It's so true.
But I also think, I get what you're saying, and I do think governments have an obligation to be out there kind of trying to fight against some of the noise and talk about some of the real things that happen. I don't know that obligation is on each of us as public servants to get in the car at the end of our shift and tell the world what's going on. But let's look at what happens when public servants go a bit rogue, break the rules. What happens?
Look, the definitive one is Comcare v. Banerjee. I'm not sure if I've got the pronunciation right, from 2019. So she was a public affairs officer at what was then not DIMIA, Immigration and Citizenship, IAC.
DIAC, yep.
I think I'm showing my age with DIMIA. Apologies, everyone. The Department of Immigration and Citizenship. So in 2012 and 13, she had an anonymous Twitter account, and posted more than 9,000 tweets criticising refugee policy, politicians of all parties, which I think is relevant, right? Because that's not party political partisan. I mean, is it partisan to hate them all? Like, is a live question. And some employees in her own department, a complaint was made, an IR investigation followed, and she was terminated. She fought it for 6 years. The the Administrative Appeals Tribunal initially found in her favour in 2018 on the basis that restrictions, but that restriction infringed her implied freedom of political communication, and it was then in the High Court. Unanimously, 7 judges said that the dismissal was lawful. The court held that the restrictions in the Public Service Act were reasonably appropriate and adapted to a legitimate purpose, maintaining the apolitical public service, and that the purpose was consistent with Australia's constitutional kind of law and order. The implied freedom of political communication is a structural limit on government power. It is not that individual right to do and to say anything you want in any context. And they also found that on anonymity, it provided no protection. If there's a realistic chance of identification, which, I mean, I think you have an account with an email address, like you log in with IP addresses. So I take my reading of it was that there's almost always a realistic chance of identification. And that identification could damage confidence, then you have breached a code and your termination will be upheld. Whether it's, and also that it wasn't about volume, whether it was 9,000 tweets or 1. That really, I think, sets the that is the bar that has been set. I think that should be better known, judgment, and preferably broken down into like dot points for those of us who like to skim read, should be better known by public servants, because it also, again, just noting how our constitutionality works, sets like that it's not an APS issue. That is what the High Court has found, that all Australian public servants, that's the kind of tests and bars that they would apply if you were dismissed and you challenged it and you found your way there. That is the precedent that they would use.
Interesting. To answer your earlier question and with reference to this judgment, I think hating them both is not being apolitical. I can see that. I think it's being decidedly political. It's not party political, but it is not apolitical.
Interesting.
Because it undermines the sense. Like, the thing I say often to people that used to work with me, or in training I still do, to public servants is, I'm so sorry, but no one actually elected you. And that's devastating and disappointing. But the people that did elect your minister and the government have a right to reasonably expect that the things they elected the government to do will be fairly and impartially and well delivered by the public service. And I think that by shitting on, frankly, politicians of both parties, that undermines that sense of trust.
I really agree. I really agree.
No,
and
I can see that.
I agree where the High Court landed on this as well. Like, I think, it'd be different if she didn't work in the immigration department. Like, that feels like, you could see how it would be wildly different. But it does feel entirely, like regrettable. Like, I'm sure, anyway, like she's a great girl, but like, that's just like, I could, live by the sword, die by the sword.
I also, haven't read the judgment. Might go and read it now just for funsies. And you're welcome to sound an alert at that point. The part where she was slagging off her other colleagues was of interest to me.
Well, they were decision makers in the department, so the decisions of the department were delegated decisions. So, I don't like the judgment itself and the specifics, but I from memory, I don't get the impression it was like Sally, who sits next to me. It was like decisions the department was making, but of course they are delegated decisions most of the time, not ministerial. They are delegated to an officer, so they are someone in your building or on your IT network, and so they are your colleagues.
God, it's so funny though, because like we let public servants run for parliament, right? Like it's just like there are so many.
They're allowed to be members of parties. They're allowed to run for parliament, admittedly while on leave, but
only while on leave. That's true. But like it's wild, isn't it? That we're, she can't tweet 7,000 times, and I don't think she should be able to. But like also then it's like, but she could perfectly go and run for a party. It's
and this is what I think. So not only is there some of those, not weird distinctions, but if I was to try and explain this to someone with no, like first day on the job, no, even though you're a public servant, no particular view as to what that means beyond I'm processing this or I'm coming in to run an IT system or something. I don't think we've pulled all the threads together to give anything nicely. And I know that there always has to be grey and room for judgment, but it can't require a conversation this long all the time on every kind of thing. And I just think that I think there's a second shoe that will drop, which is a generation of new public servants whose parents shared their life online from the minute they were born and who shared their own lives and have very different views on everything from privacy to being able to change your mind, like that kind of thing, and how they will find this and what that means for who we attract. And I think I'm not sure I necessarily have strong views, because at the end of the day I come back to feeling like a public servant where I'm like, no, but I think we need to make better kind of direction and guidance, and if it's in a really conservative direction we need to understand what the consequences of that might be.
Yeah.
So, Tony Kevin, writing on John Menadou's Pearls and Irritations, asked in 2024 whether Australian public servants are condemned to be silent members of society. Is that too strong or is that accurate?
That's way too strong. Like that isn't what happens. Like that's totally not what happens. We've given one example where someone was silenced because they were literally writing about the stuff they worked on and saying it was bad. Like I do think that is just far too strong for where we're at in the world. Like people are and do, God, I mean, honest to God, like the local public, your local neighbourhood Facebook groups gripes about local government would be very empty were it not for public servants taking part in those Facebook groups. Is what I'm saying. So public servants are taking a very active part in civic life in a range of different areas, and sort of by and large it seems to me like they're getting the kind of balance reasonably right, hence we don't have huge amounts of controversy about it. I don't know.
There's an interesting thing between the personal, if we get off LinkedIn and go back to the Facebook groups and whatever else, there's also an interesting question around kind of being able to offer your advice, which goes to that silencing, which is that question of I often encourage executives to get out of their bubble and to join like very different Facebook groups, not to stalk or watch, but if you want to know that a local services New South Wales is closed, the first place you will find that is on a Facebook group, not on Talkback Radio and through your media monitoring. If you want to know that service is slowed here or this has changed there, like again, I'm with you, Caroline, you will find a whole heap more about how fast New Start goes in those groups than you will in kind of academic literature. But sometimes you've got the answer because, of course, they're full of misinformation as well, which is, the government's kicked all women off of, something or other. And I noticed
English is not the official language or whatever.
Right? Like,
yeah.
My God. And yet, like, again, a bit like my doctor thing, there's no public servant from that area going in and going, well, here's the link, and no, they're not. Like, sometimes there is, but very, very, very rarely. And so...
Yeah, but again, are they doing that for the reason of not, like, impinging the code of conduct, or are they doing that for the much more sensible reason of I don't want to be involved in a crazy person conversation on Facebook? Right.
And also because it's not their job. We're not paying them to do that outside of the media and comms team.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. Like, they're not obliged to. I just, I don't think most people would, even if they wanted to. Like, because they wouldn't be sure where the line was.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it might be interesting to test, exactly, as Caroline's point, to what extent is it the rules stopping people from doing those things that you consider desirable, Danielle, or is it other factors?
Yeah. I think the silencing question is really interesting. I'm not sure that like public servants need to be kind of popped in a minority class of being super disenfranchised in decision making. But but I find myself conflicted. And again, I see like a real restraint, like a huge restraint. There are like whole departments where no one would even have a LinkedIn profile with a title. No, we've been told it's dangerous. Someone might send me a message on LinkedIn.
Really good security reasons, by the way.
No.
Like there are actually some quite good reasons not to be on socials. Like,
No, for sure. And I don't think I had a LinkedIn profile before I left public service. So like not pro over here, like not kind of pushing the pro from over here. But I do think that people are less sure than they've ever been about what they can do, what's right, what's not right, what's celebrating the government versus just saying I had a good day. And I think that's kind of leaders and managers. And then I think we're going to have this whole group of young people come in and be like, cool, what's the rule? And Willow be like, just be scared. It's fine. Like, I don't think that that's enough. Like, and I think that the voice referendum really showed that up quite a lot, right? Like the voice referendum gave the APSC a genuinely difficult problem. It was a government-backed yes campaign. So public servants' personal views were in many cases aligned with official policy, but not all of them. And for First Nations public servants, especially, and working in community or in that content area, the question was potentially deeply personal, cultural and communal. And they did issue some guidance and it acknowledged that particular sensitivity, and it said exercise care, don't use official resources, be especially cautious if your role connects, directly to referendum policy, but you're not required to remain silent. And sometimes I think that's what the guidance says. It says, look, it's not impossible, just beware, it's heaps risky and we can't give you specific guidance as to how. Like I think that sometimes it says it's not illegal, but don't do it anyway. That guidance in itself created this weird situation where the closer your expertise was to the content and the closer your professional knowledge touched on it, the more constrained you were in having that conversation. Not weird at all.
I totally agree with that. That seems like a perfectly sensible landing place. I don't think that's weird.
So I think that really was another big place. And of course, conflict and war has created this massive challenge for that is not even Australian public policy issues necessarily. Like, do I have a right to have a view on the actions of any foreign government? Does that view have to align with my elected government's view? If I went back in and a manager came to me and said like blah, I'm not sure I would quickly or easily be able to give them excellent guidance. Would you?
I mean, I think it goes back to all of those same things we were talking about. What's the nature of their role and their work, and how closely does it connect to this issue, and how closely might their public engagement on this issue be seen as undermining the trust in the impartiality and apoliticalness of the people that are going to have to implement whatever the elected officials choose, if they agree with it or not.
It's true. I'm just reading I'm just Googling the advice now that we're talking about it. And it's like, I had hoped they might have examples so that I could rebut you, Danielle, but I see that there are in fact there are things like if you're involved in the campaign, you should make it clear you're not participating as part of your duties. And there are some things like I find the comments around, the risk to public confidence is greater the more extreme your behaviour or expression, including the tone or the language of your comments is. Like I actually think that's a really helpful thing to say. Like so, like I can see it's quite wordy, but actually like it is a balanced call, right? Like it's like if it's not super related to your job, if you're not super senior, then, you can feel free to express a view, but you do have to be careful because you are a public servant and you do have this other impartiality obligation. Like it's...
And again, there'll be a distinction between what you're allowed to do and what it's safe for you to do in your particular workplace and context.
Yeah.
I do think that where I've landed listening to you, though, is that examples for me in all this guidance is what is needed and is helpful. And I don't mean that they are the legal standard or the policy, but I think people need to see what a version of not moderated tone might look like and a version of moderated tone. as an example of where you may be, closer to home inside the policy and definitely outside of it, I do think like I liked some of those lines too, Caroline. But again, I was like, what would moderated tone sound like? What would this sound like? And I think that we could just do a bit more on that.
Yeah, agreed. No. You had, like, I don't disagree with you. You are 100% right. The guidance is not as helpful as it could be.
Not just that one, across the board, right? Like I went and looked at all the states as well. For the APS, and anyone listening, the only reason is that it was kind of generally applicable. The states had like wildly similar kinds of things. And then there's the sector versus
more confusing.
Yeah, right. Sector versus service as well.
Mm-hmm.
So like if I am sector, if my role is incredibly technical, does that open up any further view for me to be allowed to have, again, going to conflict, views about foreign governments and the choices that their leaders make? Like bureaucracies are struggling with this, right? People are complaining about the views of a nurse or a teacher online. Sharing a tile. I mean, I don't know why I'm being so, lily-livered. It's like, so if I share a tile that says genocide is bad and I have a sector job, so one that doesn't have anything close to policy, and again, someone in the orbit of my profession sees that, they complain, I don't think we've tightened this up to the point where that person would know whether they should, like, we're in heaps of trouble, like whether they've done the right thing. So I think that there's a fair bit of angst in HR departments around the place in not being sure what to do with some of these complaints, beyond like where some of them sit kind of left
like
to
perhaps
right.
I'm being grossly simplistic, but that one doesn't seem to enliven for me a lot of the concerns that these seem to set out. If you're a nurse posting a tile like that, I just want your final thoughts, and I'm going to...
Investigations.
Yeah, complaints. That doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. People can complain about my conduct without me having...
investigations, there's like... but like people are finding, and the people doing the investigations are finding it really hard to land what tests they're testing some of these things up against, and even the regulators, teachers regulation, medical regulation, they are looking at them like someone will say you can't post this, and they're like, oh, I don't know, is this a breach of being a physiotherapist? Who could say?
Yeah, and I think this gets to this question of, is that, like, there are public service code of ethics and then there are professional ethics. So one of the reasons why that particular case, for example, of the nurses making the anti-Semitic remarks was so shocking is because
that related
not actually
to
because they were New South Wales. Not exactly. Not because they were New South Wales public health employees. That wasn't a political
statement about a nation state. That was discrimination.
No. But it's like we're saying this is where the angst is, right? And so similarly in relation to teachers, it's like if you've got a classroom of students and you say something about Palestine and Israel and there's a thing there, like that is one of the ones. So the New South Wales Education Standards Authority has issued guidelines in relation to how one might talk about that. Those are less to my mind, this kind of question of public sector code of ethics, and much more professional practice code of ethics. Like, what is your obligation to your client, so your obligation as a teacher is to whatever the things are. Like, I think, and agreed, there's some really things that weren't controversial, or things that were controversial but not so divisive and so hard to say out loud, are now harder to say out loud, and so that does change the goalposts of what people do and don't feel is okay, and it changes the goalposts of what standards people are being held to. That is true. Like, that's hard. Just doesn't feel specifically code of ethics public sector-y to me. Which is, I guess, the final point I wanted to close on. I mean, I think there's a lot of this, public servants being silenced, a kind of anxiety where, just to be clear, in most private sector forms of employment, like if you work at a Murdoch masthead, you are not publicly taking a view that is different from the editorial position of your employer. And in some ways, I think the neutrality, I guess the basis for it in the public service is more, I don't know, pure, because it is based on democracy, right? It's like on the democratically elected opinion. So
you
Are
know.
you saying that if I was a real estate agent or real estate developer, that they would have a problem with me running a online campaign against negative gearing and capital gains tax, Alison?
I am, Danielle, yes. So let's bring this one to a close. Our mug winner this week is Jenna Price, who got in touch with some excellent feedback, insights and suggestions for us. Thanks, Jenna. And to everyone navigating this issue in real time, trying to work out what you can and can't say, and whether you should even be on LinkedIn, we hope that this discussion helped a little bit, even if we couldn't agree on much. It is genuinely more complicated than the guidance makes it look, and the gap between the rules as written and the world you're actually living in, including your specific boss and your specific circumstances, has never required more nuance and judgment. Till next time.
Just some appropriately bureaucratic disclaimers. While we've tried to be as thorough in our research as busy full-time jobs and lives allow, we definitely don't guarantee that we've got all the details right. Please feel free to email us corrections, episode suggestions or anything else at thewestminstertraditionpod@gmail.com. Thanks to Pampot Audio for our intro and outro music. Till next time.